India is known for many things: a rich cultural heritage, breathtaking scenery, diverse religious and ethnic groups, and of course, one of the best cuisines in the world. Despite all the wonderful aspects of India, it's home to a large number of dangerous animals, such as deadly snakes and massive crocodiles. The latter has been causing an increasing amount of trouble in some of the local villages, so much so that it's thought that crocodiles are killing about 10 people per year in the country. That being said, many crocodilian species are protected by law, and even if you are attacked by one, it would be illegal to kill it to save your life. In this circumstance, it seems that the reptile would have more rights to live than you would. This is something that a small village in Gujarat were given to contend with when one of their farmers was dragged into a river by a hungry crocodile. The northern state of Gujarat is the 5th largest state in India and is home to over 60 million people. Although famous for its welcoming beaches and temples, it also has a very unwelcome visitor lurking in the rivers, the crocodile. As the state comprises of different local villages, it can be difficult for the government to make any meaningful changes when it comes to dealing with the hungry reptiles. The locals are instead advised not to enter the water in known crocodile habitats. This isn't always possible for the villagers, since some of them are forced into the water for multiple reasons, from bathing to livestock care. With the crocodile population seemingly skyrocketing over the last few decades, the water has become more and more dangerous for the locals. While the true population of crocodiles is difficult to calculate, it's thought that there are over 1,000 crocodiles in the Vadodara district, with the majority living in the Vishwamitra River. Unfortunately for 55-year-old Raji Vasava, this was exactly where he worked as a farm laborer, where he'd soon meet an untimely and vicious end. On Friday the 19th of September in 2014, Raji woke up early as usual and began to get ready for the day. He was a farm laborer, and today he would have to tend to his employer's cattle, taking them down to the Vishwamitra River to graze at the banks. This was his favorite daily task, since his friends, who also worked down at the bank, always left him in a good mood. As he walked behind the cattle, herding them along the path, the river opened up in front of him. As they were slowly grazing, Raji sat on a mound and watched them chew the grass. He would be here for a few hours, so decided he would get comfortable. Passers-by came and went, saying hello to him as they passed. After some time, he heard one of the buffalo in distress by the water's edge, seemingly being pulled down into the water, but he couldn't see what was happening. He could see blood start to run from the animal's leg and thought that he had been struck by something, or it had tripped on the riverbank. Knowing that his employer would be upset if anything happened to his buffaloes, Raji headed towards the wounded animal, hoping to be able to simply pull it from the water and assess the damage. Little did he know, a 14-foot crocodile would be waiting behind the cattle, ready to strike. Raji rushed into the water to pull the buffalo to safety, when he suddenly noticed what was attached to the animal. The massive reptile had grabbed onto the leg of the buffalo and was attempting to pull it off as it turned sharply in the water. Knowing that he only had a short time before the reptile won the fight, Raji began to pull his animal from the water and tried to get it back onto dry land. That's when he felt it, a powerful bite that tore into his leg and clasped him tight. He knew exactly what had happened. The crocodile had decided that he would be its next meal rather than the buffalo. Panicked, Raji shouted out for help to the other people along the riverside, hoping that someone would be able to get to him in time to save him from a watery grave. The crocodile started to drag him out to deeper water, clearly trying to finish him off before anyone had the chance to notice. As he was pulled further and further from the riverbank, he could feel the reptile begin to spin as it attempted to pull his limbs from his body. He could hear people running and shouting from the other side of the river, but he already knew that they were too late. He was in too deep, and the crocodile had already begun to dismember him as his blood began to stain the muddy water a deep red color. He was already becoming weaker, and the reptile continued to drag him under the water, keeping him just shy of the surface in a concentrated effort to drown the man. It succeeded. The villagers ran to the riverbank, horrified to see that one of their own was fighting against such a massive animal. They struggled to keep track of them both as the crocodile pulled Reggie under the water and then burst back to the surface after a few seconds. They could see the blood rushing into the water and could tell that the man was in a dire situation. He needed their help. They rushed to find whatever weapons they could, mostly settling on large sticks that were around the village. Without knowing if Reggie was alive or if any other predators were lurking in the water, the villagers threw themselves into the water, screaming at the animal to leave their friend alone. When they were finally close enough, they began to viciously hit the crocodile with their sticks, landing many successful blows. They could see Reggie in the water, but he wasn't fighting back or trying to swim away from his attacker. He was just floating there as they beat the crocodile with all their might. They knew what had happened. They knew Reggie was dead, but continued beating the crocodile to avenge their friend, whom this animal had taken away from them. They grabbed more and more weapons, hoping to inflict as much damage as possible. The animal resisted the attack for as long as it could, but after 2 hours, the injuries that it had sustained from the villagers were too great, and the crocodile finally died. It was a brutal and unyielding attack, but the locals felt that they had avenged Reggie as best they could. They dragged the bodies of both the man and the crocodile to shore so that they could fully assess the injuries. Reggie had been almost completely torn apart by the crocodile, missing several limbs, and his body was pale from blood loss. Once the bodies were back on the riverside, the group called the authorities to report that Reggie was dead. When the police arrived, they were disgusted by what they saw, but not for the reason you would think. Rather than the horror of seeing the local man dead in front of them, they were far more concerned about the dead crocodile, stating that it was a protected species. By killing the crocodile in defense of their friend, they had broken the law, which the police intended to remind them of. An offense was registered against the villagers as a warning to anyone who would try to kill another crocodile in the future, regardless of the circumstances. The results of that motion were never released, but in the past, individuals have been given a heavy fine or even imprisoned for doing the exact same thing. After the bodies were removed, people began to theorize as to why the attack even happened in the first place, and why the crocodile was in that part of the river where crocodiles are rarely reported. It was eventually decided that the crocodile had migrated downstream from Bhuruch as the Sardar Sarovar Narmada Dam had been overflowing for 40 days after the last monsoon. As the rivers began to flood, lots of creatures that called the river their home were forced to move to calmer, shallower waters if they wanted to survive, which is how Reggie came face to face with the crocodile that would eventually end his life. Although he was mourned and his body was laid to rest, the locals were still worried about other crocodiles coming into their river, and they wouldn't be allowed to do anything about it. Although conservation efforts are helping to increase the number of crocodiles in Indian rivers, this is also increasing the amount of attacks on the locals living around the river. The massive man-eating crocodiles bringing more and more of them each year to their unfortunate final affliction.